Well, welcome everyone to our online program on addiction and recovery from the Sunshine Coast Health Center up here in Powell River. And topic, uh, addiction talk. I don't know if it's just me because I'm in the business, but it seems to me far too many people are spending far too much energy talking about addiction. And when I start looking at what everyone is talking about, it becomes pretty clear that this thing we call addiction has moved way beyond the simple fact of a person using drugs. It's become like almost an abstraction. If you watch Hollywood movies now, they present people with addictions or the dealers as the dark side of life. Or those real life cop shows who spend this remarkable amount of time arresting people drinking or using drugs. It's like the good guys astride the white horse, against battling the forces of evil, right? Or we've got our former Canadian Prime Minister, who didn't seem to worry too much about sort of warping science and logic in his crusade to get rid of drugs. And we even attach this extreme language to it. I was actually kind of taken aback when I was reading this. I heard this thing from Mothers Against Drunk Driving calling a DUI a violent crime, like in the same category as assault with a weapon or something like that, right? And if you remember back a few years, there was a big poster that came out on crystal methamphetamine with a big skull and crossbones all in black, and it said, "Meth is death." Right, all of these dramatic statements about drugs that seem just a bit out of proportion to the reality of the situation. And psychologists, a lot of research psychologists have noted that we give the drugs, we give a chemical substance, what the psychologists called agency, which would be, for example, the ability to initiate and complete an action, almost as if these chemicals were like human beings, right? And I don't think any of us is surprised if we read a newspaper article, which I just did recently, about a young woman who was in chronic pain and prescribed narcotics, and she was somehow just completely overwhelmed by the narcotic and became an opiate addict, as if somehow this is just routine because of the power of this drug. Right? So in this online program, I thought we'd just spend some time looking at some of these ideas that seem to be current around, and just see how they stack up to scientific evidence, and whether we can confirm them or whether we have to jettison them or rethink them totally. Anyway, one thing we hear a lot is this magical power that we give to drugs, and this is the popular idea that addiction is in the drug, not in the person. There's something magical about the liquid or a dried plant or a black tar or a white crystalline substance that can just addict anyone. Back a few years when the crystal meth hoopla was going on, there was a newspaper article run by several newspapers in Western Canada, which stated that 96% of all people who use crystal meth twice would become addicted. Now, scientifically, this is, of course, complete nonsense, but it's a reflection of this idea that we give this enormous power to these chemicals, as if somehow they can control human beings, right? And nowadays, of course, it's the big one are the narcotics, the opioids, right? Where there's anyone who uses an opioid is in grave risk of becoming addicted, right? Unfortunately, these stories don't really match up to the reality. Nora Volkow, who runs the biggest addiction research outfit in the world called the National Institute on Drug Abuse, she says, well, if we prescribe everyone narcotics, they will become physically dependent, but only a few of them will become addicted. So Nora Volkow makes this distinction, and which is a good scientific distinction, that that being physically dependent on a drug does not mean that someone is addicted. Addiction is a different thing. And in any case, there are lots of drugs that people do not become physically dependent on. For example, LSD or cocaine. So that distinction is very important. So yes, a lot of people with chronic pain, we can say they may be physically dependent on the drug in the sense they build up tolerance, but that doesn't mean they're addicted. And the science also points out that this idea that somehow the powers in the drug is really not right. One of my neuroscience textbooks, written by a fellow by the name of James Callett, said very clearly, addiction is in the person, not in the drug. And this is why, for example, most people can drink alcohol without any problem at all. But that idea is also applicable to any drug, according to the brain scientist Carl Lewis. I mean, the research evidence shows that lots of people use these drugs without ever becoming addicted. We know this is now true of marijuana, obviously, because it's now legal everywhere. But it's also true, according to Carl Lewis, of cocaine and crystal meth and heroin and all these drugs that we ascribe this enormous power to. Anyway, something to think about. Anyway, that's it for this episode, and we'll be back next time with another one.